Right now, somewhere in Sumatra, there's a lake. It's huge, 60 miles long. Tourists ride boats on it. Children swim near the shore. It looks like any other lake. It is not. That lake is a wound. About 74,000 years ago, the volcano underneath it erupted in one of the largest explosions the Earth has ever produced. The crater it left behind filled with water. That's the lake. And when it erupted, according to one of the most debated theories in anthropology, it nearly killed every human alive. This is the story of how close we came. Not once, several times. Most people walk through life with the quiet assumption that humans were always going to make it. That we are the inevitable species, the smart ones, the winners. We are not. We are the survivors of a series of near misses so narrow that the people who study them sometimes have to stop and just sit with the numbers for a minute. Let's start with the oldest one. In 2023, a team of geneticists led by Wangjie Hu at the Chinese Academy of Sciences published a paper in the journal Science. They had built a new tool, they called it FitCoal, that could read the genomes of living people and reconstruct the size of our ancestral population going back almost 1,000,000 years. What they found was almost hard to believe. About 930,000 years ago, something happened to our ancestors. The climate shifted. Africa grew colder and drier. Food disappeared. And the population of pre-humans on Earth collapsed. It dropped to roughly 1,280 breeding individuals. Stop and picture that for a second. Not 1,280 people in a city. Not 1,280 people in a village. 1,280 breeding individuals in the entire world. That's fewer people than work at a single mid-sized office today. That's fewer people than fit in a high school gymnasium. And it wasn't a bad year. It wasn't a bad decade. That bottleneck lasted about 117,000 years. For more than 100,000 years, the entire future of humanity was carried by a group of people who could have stood in a single field and seen each other. The geneticists estimate that 98.7% of our ancestors were lost at the beginning of this bottleneck. 98.7%. We were one bad winter, one disease, one stretch of drought from never existing. And yet they survived. We don't know exactly how. We don't have their bones. There is a famous gap in the African fossil record during exactly this period, a stretch of time where the evidence almost disappears, which makes sense when you realize how few of them there were, but somehow, those people, fewer than the population of a small town, held the line. They had fire. They had each other. They had whatever it is in us that refuses to let go. And eventually, about 813,000 years ago, the climate softened. The numbers began to climb again. The ancestors of every person who has ever lived walked out of that bottleneck and kept going. Some scientists think this near extinction is one of the reasons our brains are the way they are. That the survivors were the ones who could plan, cooperate, and care for each other. That 100,000 years of squeezing through a needle made us what we are. But that wasn't the only close call. Fast forward. Roughly 74,000 years ago, modern humans now exist. They look essentially like us. They are scattered across Africa and just beginning to push out into the wider world. And then, on the island of Sumatra, the ground splits open. Mount Toba erupts. It was a Category VEI8 event, the highest classification possible. The eruption covered the Indian subcontinent in 5 centimeters of ash. 5 centimeters across an entire subcontinent. The sky goes dark in places that have never seen darkness like it. Sulfur fills the atmosphere. Temperatures drop worldwide. Plants struggle. Animals starve. In 1998, an anthropologist named Stanley Ambrose proposed something striking. He looked at the genetic evidence, the same kind of bottleneck signal geneticists find again and again in modern human DNA, and suggested that Toba was the cause. That the volcanic winter had reduced humanity to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals. A whole species, fitting inside a single stadium. Now this one is contested. We have to be honest about that. Newer studies looking at sites in India have found stone tools both above and below the ash layer, suggesting that at least some humans in some places came through it relatively intact. Researchers like Chad Yost have argued the so-called Toba bottleneck simply didn't happen the way Ambrose described. So we don't know. We may never know exactly how bad it was. But here's what we do know. We know that around that time, human numbers crashed. The DNA says so. Studies on modern human mitochondrial DNA suggest rapid population growth from a very small base, somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 individuals, between 35,000 and 65,000 years ago. We know that whether Toba did it, or something else did it, or several things did it together, our species spent the deep prehistory of its existence running on fumes, not as the dominant life form on Earth. As a few thousand frightened primates on a single continent, huddled around fires, hoping the sky would clear. Now move forward again, much closer to us this time. The year is 1347. It begins, the historians believe, on a trade ship. A Genoese trading vessel arrives in the port of Messina, Sicily. The sailors aboard are mostly dead or dying. Their skin is black in places. Their lymph nodes are swollen to the size of eggs. The locals try to turn the ship away. It's too late. The fleas had already come ashore. In the next 6 years, the Black Death moves across Europe like a tide. It does not care how rich you are. It does not care how holy. It comes for children playing in the street. It comes for monks in their cells. It comes for kings. By the time it had finished its first pass, it had killed somewhere between 30 and 60% of Europe's population. Around 50 million people. Perhaps half of everyone alive on the continent. Whole villages emptied. There are records from the time of priests walking into houses and finding entire families dead. Of grain rotting in the fields because no one was left to harvest it. Of ships drifting into harbors with crews already gone. In England, the population in 1400 was perhaps half what it had been 100 years earlier. About 1,000 villages simply disappeared. This was not a near extinction in the genetic sense. Humanity as a species was not at risk. There were people in China, in Africa, in the Americas, who never saw a single case. But for the people who lived through it, in Florence and London and Paris, it was the end of the world. They genuinely thought the species was finished. And here is the part I find quietly extraordinary. They kept going. After a generation, the survivors started having children again. The fields were replanted, the villages were rebuilt, the same human stubbornness that pulled 1,280 of our ancestors through 100,000 years of cold, pulled medieval Europe through the plague. We do this, over and over, we do this. Step forward one more time. It is the fall of 1918. The First World War is ending, soldiers are coming home, and they are bringing something with them. It is a strain of influenza that no one's immune system has ever seen before. A scientist today would tell you it was an H1N1 virus that probably came from birds. At the time, people had no idea what a virus even was. The Spanish flu, which didn't actually come from Spain, that's just where the press was reporting freely, swept around the world in 3 waves. It infected about 500 million people, 1/3 of the world's population at the time. It killed around 50 million worldwide, double the number who died in World War I itself. It hit middle-aged, otherwise healthy people especially hard. People aged 20 to 40 accounted for about half of the deaths. Your great-grandparents lived through this. If you ask your family, there is almost certainly a story. A name on a tree somewhere that just stops. An uncle nobody remembers because he was 23 and then he wasn't. This was just over 100 years ago. Which brings us finally to the question nobody likes to ask. If our species has come this close this many times, the 930,000-year bottleneck, the volcanic winter, the plague, the flu, and a dozen smaller close calls in between, how lucky are we really to be here? The honest answer is extraordinarily. You're reading this because 1,280 people in a corner of Africa 900,000 years ago did not give up. Because someone fed someone else when there was almost nothing to eat. Because a small group of humans walked out of a volcanic winter and started over. Because a Florentine grandmother in 1351 took in her dead sister's children and raised them even though she was sick herself. Because a nurse in 1918 worked another shift, when she was already exhausted and saved a stranger who eventually became somebody's grandfather. Every one of us is the endpoint of an unbroken chain of people who refuse to be the last one. That's a strange thing to hold in your head. It is also, I think, a beautiful one. Because when you look at it that way, the human story is not really the story of how powerful we are. We are not powerful. We are small mammals on a damp planet that has tried to shake us off many times. The human story is the story of how stubbornly we love each other, how we keep showing up, how a grandmother in the Pleistocene and a grandmother today do roughly the same thing. Feed the children, tell the stories, hold the line. We almost didn't make it. Several times we almost didn't, but we did. And the only reason any of us is here is because somewhere, some ancestor you'll never know the name of in a place you'll never see, decided that today was not the day the species would end. So far, they have all been right.